This is Shelf Space. If you think getting media coverage for your brand means blasting out a generic press release, think again. This conversation dives into the real art of food journalism. My guest, Andrew Watman from Forbes, breaks down the nitty-gritties of why grabbing headlines is actually more about looking to the past than it is about innovation or expansion. We chat through how to navigate the relationship game with journalists and how long-form storytelling is the ultimate way to connect with your consumers and a wider audience. If you want to know how to turn your brand's journey into a compelling narrative that journalists actually want to tell, you're going to want to listen carefully. And as you can guess, before I jump in with Andrew, I want to make sure to give a shout out to the Shelf Space partners that make it possible for me to deliver interviews like this to your ear holes for free. Benchmark 60, TD Business Banking, Fasken Law, Pacific Coast Distribution, REMA, and Picnic Creative. These businesses and the CPG champions behind them are making this all happen, and I'm so grateful for their support. Okay, here's my conversation with Andrew. Andrew, this is going to be fun. Thanks for joining me on Shelf Space. We have a lot that I want to cover. You'll have to see how I handle myself here. I think I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you. But before we jump in, I just want to ask the big question. If you look ahead to the future, what's one innovation you'd love to see in the grocery store?
Innovation. Wow. I mean, it's funny because innovation is forward-looking, but I think a lot of people are actually looking into the past today, and I like that. There's the more recent past, which is just kind of nostalgia from our childhoods, but a lot of people are going even further back, pre-industrial food systems to kind of get back to real ingredients, which I love to see. So I think actually innovation for the future, in a way, is looking at the past and seeing what humans are supposed to be eating and making that scalable, because we all deserve to eat healthy, nutrient-rich food. A lot of even lettuce and carrots and zucchinis and corn is not even that rich in nutrients on our grocery store shelves. So how do we get back to basics, which for some reason seems a little radical and requires some innovation today? But that's how I think of the term innovation today, is actually getting back to our roots.
I love it. I think that sounds fun. And certainly, I love going through the grocery store, going through the produce section and, finding and discovering amazing things. I loved the first time I brought home dragon fruit to my daughter. And, it looks like Klingon food. Like a dragon fruit is a scary looking piece of fruit. And I just, explained to her, I said, hey, let's look it up. Let's see where dragon fruit comes from. Let's look what's in dragon fruit. And it was a really fun thing. So a lot of the listeners here won't actually know who you are, but I know who you are because I stumbled across one of your Forbes articles that you wrote. It would have been about a year and a half ago is when I read your first one. And the writing you do in Forbes and the writing you do for other publications, it's clear to me that you love the food space, that food founders and food leaders are interesting to you, and their stories and their products they scratch an itch in your creative mind. And so what I'd love for this conversation is if we can kind of talk through what is it like for founders to capture the attention of journalists, to get on the radar of media outlets, and to take their message and their product out into the world in such a way that doesn't feel like advertising. And so I want to kind of dive into that. And my first question along that line is, when was the last time a food founder approached you with a story idea or with a press release, with a statement of some kind, and it actually cut through the noise and got your attention? What did they do to get your attention as a journalist?
Well, it's not press releases. I couldn't tell you the last time I really looked at a press release. It's just they're just robotic, formulaic. It doesn't really, I'm looking for a deep story. Sometimes there is a newsworthy hook as to why we're getting the story out at that moment. Could be like a retail launch or fundraising news. Maybe there's something really timely out there that you want to get a story out at that moment. And if that's the case, just, tell me. be open with me. So help me help you kind of. So I don't really respond to super robotic press releases, PR talk. I can kind of see when there's something that you're not telling me. And if the founders are just completely open with me about what they need at the moment, then I am able to help them better. So what I'm looking for usually is just, founders can be open with me about, they can reach out to me directly even. A lot of times they hire publicists, but I actually respond better to founders directly. Does that answer your question, Corbin?
Yeah, I mean, you just told me that press releases don't really work, but
it depends what the goal is. For me, if you're looking for press, I like people just, talking to me like a real human. A press release is far from that. So not to say that there isn't a time and place for a press release, perhaps, but if you're trying to get my attention to write a nice story about you, I don't see the need for it. Just, make a relationship with me even before you need a story. I like to get to know the people I write about. I like to, let's grab a drink. Let's get coffee. I want to get to know you a little bit without a game plan even.
Well, and usually where the game plan comes into play is that there's a new brand in the portfolio. There's a new product or product line, or there's a new expansion into a new market. There's something on the food business side that they want to brag about and they want to get attention about it. And so it's that is the spark. That is what you're saying. I mean, that's just not necessarily a spark for you. It doesn't necessarily fill a need for you in the storytelling aspect.
Right. I want to tell a story. Every writer out there has kind of a different perspective on what they put out into the universe. I personally write pretty deep stories with, a beginning, middle, and end. So if there's just like one specific piece of one niche, we're coming out with this collab, or we have one new flavor coming out that's not necessarily for me. It's not to say it's not for another writer, but I want to get the full depth about why, I want to tell a full story, not just kind of like get some news out there. I like kind of doing all of it in one. So my stories take time. That's the thing too. If, we have a launch coming out next week, there are some exceptions, but I can't really get to know you so well in a short amount of time. It's not what I personally do in my writing. I want to get to know you and not to have a microphone in your face either while we're just getting to know each other, but getting to know your personality, who you're about helps guide me in the way I want to write, not the content that I write, but more of I want to translate who you are in the tone, how I write the story, getting to know my topic, my founder, the product itself, how you got here. That really helps guide my writing.
That's pretty intimate. There's a lot of food makers, food manufacturers that don't really want to be that vulnerable with a relatively new person in their network. So how do you help? I know, because I know as a journalist, that's one part of your world, but the reality is that there are food founders that rely on you for helping them get their stories out there and grow what they're doing. So how can a leader of a food manufacturing or beverage manufacturing business prepare themselves or train themselves to be more media friendly or more sort of storytelling aware? Because a lot of people, when they get asked, what's your story? They're like, well, I was born at the early age in the presence of my mother, and I liked food, and now I did this, and now I do that. And they don't feel like they have a story, but the reality is they probably do.
Yeah, not everyone needs some, deep story there are going to be books written about this and you're a case study for this or that. Like, that's not, to me, what the story always is. And that is also why I like to get to know my founders that I'm writing about, because sometimes they don't even realize the story in their story. And that's why I like to get to know them and pick their brain and ask them a bunch of questions that might seem like, well, like, where am I going with this? Like, why are you asking that? And a lot of these questions may result in not much for me to work with. But I feel, and I've experienced, that the more questions I ask someone and the more time I spend with someone, the more I learn and I can find the story in what they're telling me. Now, sometimes the story itself is a little bit more direct. You know, sometimes it's like, oh, this was my mom's recipe growing up. I couldn't find this anywhere and I made it myself. That's, you know, we see that a lot. Sometimes it's something much more specific. Maybe someone has some, you know, near-death experience. But even if not, even if you just, I love the food space and I wanted to create brands and I had a good idea. I just had an idea and I went with it. I can find a story in that too. This is why I always tell people who I write about, you know, thank you for trusting me, because they don't necessarily know me. I can write whatever I want, essentially, and they're putting trust in me. So I always appreciate anyone coming to me with their story because they're putting trust in me. And so I try and also give people, while I'm interviewing them, just, you know, it's a safe space with me. Really, there's nothing that's off limits. If there's something deeply personal, you know, you don't have to share everything with me. But if you do share it with me, I take it gently. And I want people to warm up to me. That's also why sometimes I do intro calls with people and I want to meet them beforehand before we just jump right into a deep interview, you know, because I want to form relationships with these people because, I mean, at the end of the day, my story is just, it's going to be a better story. And if your goal is to get eyes on you and your product, well, you know, this is how we're going to write a better story for that result anyway. So I try and just show them that I'm here to help also.
Well, and the press release approach speaks to this spaghetti against the wall, kind of like we're gonna throw it out there. We're gonna try to hit as many journalists and media outlets as possible and see who picks it up. And that's the term, right? Who's gonna pick it up? And then we'll just focus on those. This cultivation you're talking about, this is very relational. And so when you see founders and food leaders kind of lean into their PR strategy in such a way that they're cultivating relationships over time and it's a little bit more organic and it's a little slower. I mean, it sounds like that fits into the way that you work. And you talked about exceptions to the rule. So I'll come back to the second. So how much of an exception or the rule are you when it comes to other journalists and other media outlets that, you know, that you've seen? Like, is this normal? Are you normal?
Maybe not. I don't know. You know, I follow my own gut instincts. I didn't have some strategy for myself to make everything I'm saying right now my, you know, how I go about writing my stories. This is just how I naturally went forward with things because it felt natural to me. And then it just kind of became the way that I like to conduct my business and write my stories because it was just what was natural to me. I'm sure there are other people out there who are either similar or have their own ways of choosing what stories they write and how they go about it. But this is just what feels right for me. That's why I am always trying to stress to founders when I'm talking to them about getting media coverage, don't just see what sticks. Know the journalist who you're talking to, know their work, and don't just flood them with things because you want 10 headlines. Now, maybe if you know someone's work and they kind of, it seems like they're a little faster paced, then maybe for them that would work. But that's not personally how I write my work. So I think in order to get my attention, kind of know who you're pitching to. know your goals. I personally don't want to write an article when there's already articles out there about this. I like writing new stories that people don't know about. And so if there's something about your own story that you think hasn't been told, cool, let's talk. But, it has to be pretty deep. I spend time on my stories. I've spent months on stories, seasons. Not to say I can't turn something around pretty quick if I need to. There's a couple things that I throw in there sometimes that are a little bit more traditionally newsy, like, oh, this is opening, and I have to turn something around pretty quick. But those are usually stories that I want to write about, so I'm seeking them out. If people are pitching me stories, I want people to understand, like, I want to go visit you. Did you create some, your own facility to create your product? Cool. Can I come? I want to tour it. I want to immerse myself in this. So that's who I am. If you're willing to bring me along for the ride, then let's go.
Well, let's talk about the exceptions to the rule, which you hinted at a few moments ago. And that was sort of around when there is a new product or a new brand, or there's some basically like a launch that does get your attention. What is it about those situations where you're like, yeah, okay, this is important. This is interesting. I want to write about this new thing that someone has done.
They're pretty few and far between, honestly. If it's something really major. Even with that, though, I appreciate if someone can give me a heads up pretty early so that I do have time to give it the attention it probably deserves. But if you didn't, and listen, sometimes there are 24 hours, I just cannot do that. But a week, if there's a major sale on something, it's just a gut feeling. So I just kind of know right away if it's something that I want to pursue and if I'm willing to give it my time and energy. It's just a gut feeling. I don't check boxes. I don't have a list of criteria. I don't prepare questions for people. Like I was saying, I didn't even know right away that this is the type of writing I would want to do. It is just what came out of me. It's just what came out of me. And then it became meaningful because I was starting to really, I was having therapy sessions with people when I'm interviewing them. And so I started to realize that the stories I was telling were powerful. So it's just a gut feeling, going back to what you were saying. Like, if I'm going to turn something around really quick, it's very rare, but it's just, if I just really want to do it, I have to really want to write about it. I think I just know when I know.
And the media landscape has changed a lot over the last few years. And from what I understand, in a lot of journalists and writers in your situation is that you may write something that you're really passionate about, but then you have to basically pitch that to an editor, to a media outlet and saying, here's something I've made. Do you want to publish it? So it's sort of like the food people are selling you on the idea, then you have to write something amazing, then you have to sell it to somebody else. So there's this chain, this value chain of PR. What's your take on what the media landscape is for the business community and trying to get out these stories and find places and audiences that actually will care about what they're doing?
Right. I mean, pitching is a job in itself with little return a lot of times. So that's also why I have to decide if this is worth my time, because there's only so many hours in the day. That's why I think founders should just talk to journalists themselves. Just reach out, see what's up. It's not there's no secret game. I don't think publicists necessarily know something so secretively that they're gatekeeping. I think it's all just a relationship game. And since the media has changed so much, I think that's why it's really important to know who you're pitching. is this person, a freelancer? Is this person on staff somewhere? Get to know their work a little bit more and understand that we have to really pick and choose our stories carefully. Get to know the journalists who you want to tell your story before you need it from them.
Industry events are sort of these moments in a food manufacturer's calendar that are really important. They're typically grocery buying, like getting in front of buyers, getting in front of Costco and Loblaws and Safeway and Whole Foods and all those Krogers. Now, events like that have media passes, and they want the event organizers, the trade show organizers, they want people like you to walk up and down the aisle and meet people and eventually, write about the show and write about the exhibitors and write about the stories. When you get a media pass and you walk into a trade show with what is usually thousands of food companies, it's overwhelming to a lot of us, but what is it like for you? Do you feel like you can find those diamonds in the rough, or is it just a fire hose and it does nothing for you? Like, what's the opportunity for you when you walk into a big industry show?
Usually I find like one or two diamonds in the rough, actually. I have different goals sometimes. Sometimes I'll, want to write a bit of a roundup of some things I've noticed and then talk to founders in those spaces. But less so now. Everyone kind of says the same thing. So I'm like, all right, what's my story going to add to the conversation here? I would rather meet people at those shows that I can later get to write their full stories instead of just writing like, oh, there was a lot of, dairy products at Expo West this year, and here are 2 or 3 brands. I instead now am more focused on meeting brands. Like, for me, it's always just keeping relationships long term. It doesn't always have to be immediate either. It's not like, oh, I love you, let's write a story, it'll be out next month. It's like, oh, cool, you're doing something amazing here. Love your product, love you. Let's keep in touch. And I mean it when I say that. Like, let's keep in touch so that when you do have something big happening, I want to be the one to tell the story. But then it's not just about that big thing happening. It's also, how did we get here? So me keeping those relationships is special, and it makes me like so excited to write these stories when it's eventually time. With the high concentration of so many brands in one space, a lot of times I'll meet a brand that, maybe I've had my eye on, just like I just really love the brand or the product. And then it's just kind of a good opportunity to introduce myself. But a lot of times also, like, I'll just find a brand I'd never heard of and I taste the product and I'm like, what did you put in here? And I want to know everything. And then I want my stories to help the brands as much as possible. So if we wait 6 months, a year even to get a story out, it could possibly have more impact than if we got it out now. So let's keep in touch. Let me spend time on this. Let me not rush to put it out. Let me spend time on it. And then we can write an amazing story and it'll have a lot of impact out there. So I'm always looking for something that I'm not looking for at one of these trade shows. I don't go to too many of them because it hurts my feet a lot.
They are exhausting in a very unique way.
They hurt your feet. I definitely need a foot massage after. But they're fun too. There's some nice camaraderie and stuff. And I just like, talking to these founders because I admire them.
When someone does get some media, they get an article come out in a publication or a media outlet that's, interesting and helpful to them. And some people just leave it at that. And other founders and other businesses are able to leverage it. They make extra clips about it. They do supportive media around it. Their social feed is sort of finds multiple ways to add it to stories, and they're amplifying the message. What are some of the examples that you see out there when someone they got good media and they really maximized that coverage?
I don't think there's like a secret recipe, because sometimes a story of mine will do really well just in terms of like, the amount of readers that I didn't necessarily expect, and the opposite sometimes too. And I just think sometimes, there's a product out there that's just like, people just love this product. I don't think those do well because someone amplified it on social media really well. It kind of mirrors a product being successful in itself. Sometimes it's not because they made the best decisions here and that's why this brand is succeeding. It's just like the product just speaks for itself. And I think it's kind of the same where it's like, oh no, this is just, people have been wanting to hear more about this brand. And here you go. Here, the time has come.
It sounds like lightning in a bottle, though.
I'm not the biggest social media person, right? Like, I just write my stories for the most part. I'll post it on social media, but that's it. I don't have a strategy there really. Maybe the brands have a little more strategy than I do, but I like to think of my stories too as kind of evergreen, where, they'll get the most media coverage within like 24, 48 hours of it going up. But I want them to use them whenever they need to share their story with someone. Sometimes it's easier to explain it by just sending, here, just read this. This isn't my story. Sometimes it's easier for them to do that. So I kind of think of it as a tool for them to use for the life of their business even. Then sure, some things will change as the brand evolves and grows. But at the end of the day, it's, look at the date on it and you'll see what has changed, or, the story is not going to change really. I mean, the backstory isn't. Perhaps something new will happen in the lifespan of the company, and then maybe we're due for another update story. But yeah, I like to think of my stories as evergreen, and that's another reason why it's like I don't think some collab or some new partnership or a new flavor, something like that. That's why those hooks don't really resonate with me, because that kind of strikes as a moment in time. I want something larger. And now a big retail launch can be something larger, because it's not just the fact that you got into Whole Foods necessarily. It's that, okay, well, what does this say now about the brand that you're now getting into Whole Foods? How did we get here? What does this mean for the next step? Have you been trying to get into Whole Foods forever and you finally did it? Or is this really just the first of many bigger steps?
Looking back at your portfolio, is there a story that stands out that sort of surprised you with how well it was received?
I wouldn't say that any have surprised me with how they performed. I don't look at those performance. It doesn't mean much to me. Sure, sometimes it's interesting to be like, oh, wow, this one did better than I thought. But that's really the extent of it. Maybe the brands think differently than I do.
Yeah, guaranteed they do.
But from my perspective, that has very little impact on how I reflect on things or how I decide to pick a story up.
Do your media outlets feel the same way? Like if they know that you wrote an article last month and it got, a really high number of readers, do they then keep those expectations?
It depends. It depends on the outlet. Some are like, oh, this didn't perform well. Maybe this general topic is not really for us. But I view it more as like, what stories meant the most to me? What stories can have the most impact? What stories are not being told? That's why I like to talk to farmers and meet them at their farms. I travel to go to their farms and hear what are their lives like. And sometimes they're taken aback that I went out of my way to go visit them. And because they've never experienced that. No one, a lot of times we see, these consumer facing brands getting a lot of attention, as they should, but I like to kind of, how did this get to the shelf? Where did this ingredient come from? I mean, everything comes from the ground. So that means it came from a farmer. And this is why I love talking to brands who are open about where they source their ingredients, because not only should people know that and want to know that, but that also gives me the opportunity to speak to farmers, and people can connect the dots. Like, oh, this really cool product on the shelf was grown by this guy in Iowa or this person in California. And I love that. Or anywhere in the world, really. I'll go wherever I need to. And I love telling the stories about how these ingredients were grown and then turned into these really cool products that we love and support. And, we're not just supporting this one brand with pulling out our wallet. We're also supporting these farmers. And when I get to tell those stories, that's when I care about viewership, just because I want I want people to be reading these stories and hearing about these farmers. I only care about those numbers because I want as many people to hear from these people, because no one knows what their lives are like. And they're the ones growing all of our food. And those are the stories that stick with me, and the ones that motivate me to write more and more and more. And so if you have a story like that, I'm interested.
So what's the future of media and public relations? If you had your crystal ball and you were looking into the future, what do you think? What is it going to look like when people are trying to publish stories and get the word out?
There's a lot going on today. There's a lot going on in terms of new brands coming out, and they're meaningful. I want to focus on the brands that are meaningful today. I'm not thinking too much about the future, aside from just the resiliency of our food system. I mean, that is what I think about in terms of the future. But media specifically, personally, I just want to have an outlet to tell my stories. Really, a lot of it is, going away, but it's also giving opportunity for new ways of getting our information out there. Traditional media it's not even that it's disappearing, it's that they are not giving the journalists as many opportunities to tell the stories that need to be told. So they're being told in different ways. I just am grateful for my platform to be able to tell the stories that I want, how I want to tell them. I think we do need to keep some traditional media alive, though. I like traditional media blended with some new ways, but it takes growing an audience to do that. And sometimes that is just, you need something a little bit more immediate, and that takes a little more time. So that's where, maybe more of a traditional outlet would come in. But it's hard to say because everything's changing so quick. So I just focus on the now personally. But for brands, what to expect with media, I think just keep relationships with the people who you want to be telling your stories in the future. Keep your relationships with them, and always just kind of poke around out there to see who's out there. I'm always finding, even you, Corin, one day I was like, who is this guy? And you were posting some cool stuff, and I'm like, okay. And then and then we've gotten to know each other a bit, and here we are telling stories on this podcast. So I like long form stuff, which is why I kind of think I like podcasts. I like long form. I want people to embrace long form storytelling. And that's why I find a balance in my stories, because people have short attention spans, including myself. So if I want them to read long form stories, then it's on me to keep them engaged, to keep reading. So I think it also means good journalism. Not it's on the media organizations and the formats that are out there, but it's also on the journalists to keep writing stories that are so good that you can't even say no to them. If you're writing stories that are just filler to get a headline out there for something or someone, then I see through that. I think people want to learn something. I don't think people really cares too much about some random thing that you're a pop-up or something. Sure, maybe you want to get some heads out there. Sure, that's fine. That exists. But really, why are you a brand that is really speaking to current sentiments? How do you make people feel? People want to learn about that, and it's on journalists to keep writing really impactful stories and keeping journalism alive. And it doesn't always have to be so heavy hitting. It can be a really uplifting story. Just let's tell stories. Let's tell really, really good stories. That is how I think the future is going to be. We have to just tell important stories and go anywhere we need to tell these stories.
That's awesome. All right, last question for you, Andrew. Favorite grocery store in the world?
Oh my gosh.
And it can be down the street. It does not have to be global.
Yeah. I love going to grocery store. The favorite grocery store in the world, I don't think even has a name. I mean, I'm sure it has a name, but I don't know the name, because one of the first things I typically do when I go anywhere is I check out a little bodega or a little, market of some sorts, because that is just my favorite thing to do when I am in a new place and kind of want to learn a little bit about a different culture. And it doesn't have to be some culture on the other side of the world. I mean, you can go to, Georgia or Texas or wherever you are and learn a little bit about a niche, small town, and learn about how they shop and spend their money. One that's sticking out is just like a little grocery store in the middle of Argentina where we got empanadas there, but it was also a grocery store, but they had really good empanadas there. And then we bought some yerba mate bags as well, and they had so does it have a name? No, but I love to check out grocery stores anywhere in the world. It's like my favorite activity, actually. But there's some also cool Happier Grocery is amazing in New York.
That's a good one. Andrew, thank you for taking the time to chat. I always feel so relaxed after talking with you. It's always like, oh
my gosh,
all the stress of the day just melts away talking with you. So you're right. You are a counselor of sorts. And I appreciate that.
I just like to talk and see where the conversation goes. That's how I do. That's how I live.
I love it. Good deal. Well, thanks again for doing this. Thanks for joining me on Shelf Space, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Corin.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shelf Space. If you like what you hear, I would be eternally grateful for a 5-star rating and a quick share on social. Your support means the world to me and our partners, TD, Fasken, Rima, Pacific Coast Distribution, Picnic Creative, and Benchmark 60. For bonus content and resources from our sponsors, go to shelfspacepodcast.com. I'm Corbin Hebert. I'm glad we're on this rocket ship together. I'll see you in the future.